Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. If you're just checking out this review, this is our podcast, Marvel-ous Movie Mondays, every Monday with Kelsey and Dill. I'm joined by Kelsey Kilpatrick. How are you, Kels?
I'm doing good, Dell. How are you?
I'm doing great. So anyone checking this out for the first time, this is our show. Normally we go through the news of the week and then we talk about whatever show or Marvel topic we want to talk about. And we go in depth. But since there's a new Marvel movie, we're just doing a basic movie review. We're gonna do some spoilers, but not till the very end. So in the timestamps below, you will see when the spoilers start, so you don't get spoiled if you haven't seen Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. If you have, though, feel free to watch the whole video. We are going to start with talking about some of the stuff we liked about the movie, and then going into some of the stuff we might have not liked about the movie, and then of course talking about a few little spoiler things that we have to talk about because there's a little bit that we can't really say, but we want to say, especially if you've seen the podcast before. There's some character in particular we want to talk about. So Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, who's done some indie stuff. He did Short Term 12, was his big breakout with Brie Larson, Lakeith Stanfield, Rami Malek, really kickstarted a lot of their careers. Then he went on to make a book adaptation of The Glass Castle and Just Mercy. The Glass Castle I did not like very much. Just Mercy was a pretty good movie, but this is his first big blockbuster studio film. Also, big roles for Simu Liu, who is the guy who plays Shang-Chi. He's mostly a TV actor. He's dabbled a little bit in stunt work and music, but this is his first huge leading role on screen in theaters. And then you have Aquafina, who's been blowing up. And then a lot of other great actors, Michelle Yeoh, Tony Leung as the father, Shang-Chi's father, and so many other great actors. Some of them are spoilers, so I don't want to dive too much into the cast, but that's your basic layout of Shang-Chi. But I want to just know, Kelsey, what did you feel about Shang-Chi overall?
I had a great time with this movie. I had a great time. I think I turned to you right at the end and I was like, "Wasn't it so good?" And you were like, "We'll talk." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay, fine."
Yeah.
But I was just so giddy and excited to talk about this one. I just thought that this movie was so unique.
Mhm.
It really broke barriers, I feel and explored themes and relationships outside of the typical MCU
Right.
format, which I
Mhm.
really liked a lot. Specifically, the fight sequences were so unique. It was just so stylistic. It almost looked like a dance. It was like choreography,
I
you
turned to
know?
you during the movie and I was like, I love this episode of Dancing with the Stars because
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
so in
yeah.
tandem and they have their. It was beautiful. Yeah, I agree. It's almost like it's genre filmmaking within the genre of superhero, because the
Yeah.
genre of superhero films I feel has become now its own genre nowadays. There's kind of an expectation
Mhm.
of what that formula is, especially with Marvel specifically. That a few films, whether they're great or not, have tried to break that mold. I think of Joker and the DC. I don't love Joker, but at least it tried to do something different within the
Mhm.
superhero formula. And then you have films like Black Panther that I felt were very separate from the rest of the Marvel universe. And I feel this is the same type of movie. It's like a genre film. It is a homage to the older kung fu films.
Mhm.
So much inspiration from these famous kung fu movies, and you see that throughout this movie. It does feel it's a kung fu movie set in the Marvel universe. And I think that was the best thing, is that the whole time I wasn't thinking, oh, this is a Marvel movie. I was thinking, oh, this is a movie. And it just happens to be in this universe, which I really, really love. I love when it's unique and singular, and you can watch it separately and still be able to get what's going on. And there's one or two Marvel ties, obviously, because they have to, but
Mhm.
it's not overbearing to the point where you need to watch all the movies to understand this one. There's only one movie that you really should watch if you want to get the full resonant experience of this one. But even then, if you don't see it, it doesn't ruin your viewing of this.
Yeah, for sure. And just going off of that, it's everything about this movie keeps you on your toes.
Hmm.
It's everything was unpredictable, I feel. Everything surprised me. I mean, I want to talk about things, but I don't know if they're
Yeah.
spoilers or not.
Yeah,
But
we'll get there in a little bit, because I do want to get to the spoiler section soon, because there is so much to talk about in record regarding that.
yeah.
But this cast too, I think the cast is also a huge strong suit. I think the beauty of Black Panther is that it showed so much representation for younger audiences and older audiences, but especially younger audiences, to see people like them on screen. And I think it's just so special when you see so much Asian representation on the screen. I think that's also very special. I mean, this year we got the first or second female-led superhero movie in the MCU with Black Widow, and now we're getting the first Asian-led movie within the MCU. Because we've had, obviously Wong in the MCU, but we've never really had a leading man or woman who is Asian. Now we get two. We get a leading man and a leading woman, because Aquafina, I think, is just as much a lead as Simu Liu is in this movie.
Mhm.
So what did you think of the performances? Because I'm assuming that's part of your good, right?
Yeah, yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
yeah, yeah.
I liked the performances a lot. I think also just things that I like first things that come to mind was the set design. Like,
Hmm.
specifically of, like, the cage match scene, because
Yeah,
that's been in the trailer, we can talk about that, but, like, you
right.
can tell that, like, they built that. Like, that wasn't there wasn't anything, like, green screen about it, like, that was a tangible, like, living,
Hmm.
breathing set, and yeah.
It's good that you bring that up too, because I did feel the same way. There were a lot of like just natural, like obviously not natural lit, like obviously you have to play with the lighting, but like there was
Mhm,
so much like natural sets, and I really
mhm.
like that. Obviously there were some green screen stuff, like they do a whole fight on the side of a building. Obviously these people are not hanging off the side of a building; they are
Right.
on a green screen with cables connected to them. But like there were so many good like just set designs throughout, especially when they go to like this little village and the colors in the village. I mean,
Mhm,
I've always loved in Disney World when you go to Epcot and you're walking around the World Showcase. I love to stop in China because of those beautiful like buildings and the roofs and the colors and all the costumes and the dresses and the lions, and like there's so much beauty in Chinese culture, especially this, just the abundance of color in this movie. Even in the beginning, there's like a scene where two very important characters meet, and they almost have like what you were talking about, like that little dance sequence when they meet. It's an action sequence, but it's also kind of like this beautiful, harmonious, lyrical thing.
mhm,
And the colors in that too were beautiful. It
mhm.
was just a very visually eye catching movie, and that's been a lot of my complaints about some of the recent MCU films, is that like sometimes it gets a little bland and a little darker and a little
Sure.
muddier, and like it doesn't have as much personality to it. It's more about the story and the characters. But this one felt like they really put a lot of effort into like the visual scope of it, which I really liked.
Mhm.
Who are you?
Yeah, I think Aquafina gave a great performance, just jumping back to your
Yeah,
original question you asked
yeah.
me. She really, like yeah, she became, like, a much bigger role than I thought she would, because this is what
Hmm.
I'm talking about, like, this movie, like, surprising you. It's like, you think, like, going into it is that she's just gonna be like a Ned, like, to Peter Parker, in the sense where it's, like, just the funny friend who's kinda just there on the sidelines, when really her character, like, has her very own arc, like, goes through, like, not as much as Shang-Chi, but, like, she's with him, like, practically the entire movie, like,
Yeah.
literally the entire movie, and is able to just, like, go through everything that he's going through, like, with him, and it's just it's a great, like, I feel like catalyst for the audience is, like, her
Hmm.
character, because like, she's, like, the funny, relatable one, and then, like, his story, like, obviously you care about because he's the protagonist, so
Yeah.
I loved their relationship so
Hmm.
much.
Yeah, and I also have to shout out, Simu himself. Like the
Mhm.
performance of Shang-Chi is great as well. Like his relationship with her is great in the movie, because again, a lot of Marvel, they love to do romance, but here it's like just this platonic friendship, and I really like that, how it's like
Mhm.
they're almost just like best friends, and you see that very beautiful connection between them. Then you also have relationships with him and like his sister, and then him with these other people that are somehow connected to him and his family. Just seeing how he reacts to each one, and how he almost finds himself through other people. I mean, it's a very beautiful piece on family, and I think not since maybe Guardians and Black Panther have we really seen that family dynamic so strong. I mean, we also saw in
Mhm.
Black Widow too, to an extent, but like even more so here, because also the villain, I mean, you've seen it kind of from the trailers, the villain is also a part of the family and having to navigate that. And I think, Tony Leung is amazing as the villain. I think the best Marvel villains are the ones where you can really, really, um, understand their motives and understand what they want and why they want it. And it's very clear what his motive is. And it obviously goes against everything that some of the other characters are wanting, and it poses a big threat for all the other characters. But at the same time, you understand where he's coming from.
Mhm.
This man has like these demons that he needs to deal with, and it creates a very powerful face off when eventually he does face off against Shang-Chi. Like, it's a very, very powerful dynamic. It's not obviously the most menacing villain. I mean, in the same movie, as we saw from the trailer, like, we get Abomination in this, and like that's a much more
Mhm.
daunting, scary villain. But I think the ones that are more relevant to the characters and that have the bigger arcs, I think, are the more interesting villains in the MCU, like a Killmonger, even like a Thanos, who is both scary and just a very well written villain. So,
Mhm.
what were your thoughts on the villain in this? Unless you want to wait till spoilers, because I know it's hard to navigate without spoilers. But
I mean, I like the villain a lot. Like, I
yeah.
thought that that was very interesting because we've
Hmm.
seen the dynamic between like our protagonist and their father. Like, this is a
Hmm.
trope we've seen before. But with this one, it's like you never see them like go toe to toe in combat. And I
Hmm.
was like, I was conflicted because I can see where they're both coming from, obviously, as you were saying. But at the same time, like, I did write down in my notes, I'm like, yeah, like, take this guy down. Like,
Yeah.
he trained you into this assassin. Like, he let that person like beat you with sticks in your childhood. And that's another thing I liked about this movie is that I feel like in like previous like MCU movies, like, I feel like we get all the childhood stuff and like all the flashbacks, if you will, like all at once, and
Bingo.
then we
Hmm.
know, like, we know everything. But like
Yeah.
with this one, like, they keep having these flashbacks and they keep going back and we keep learning new information. And I thought that that was just such a unique approach to giving us, did I just say approach like it's a word? A
Yeah.
unique
Like, a nice
approach.
approach, yo. Yeah.
A
That sounds like
unique
something someone in this movie would say, but we'll get there.
That was so
Spoilers.
embarrassing. I can't believe I just did that. A unique approach
Yeah.
to giving us, more information throughout this film.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like, the weaving of the backstory throughout was just awesome because
Mhm.
if you just load it up all up in the front, it kind of almost makes some things later on a little predictable. But because you don't have everything spelled out earlier on, like you said, it keeps you on your toes. And I think part of that is because you don't know the full backstory. And so there are reveals all the way up till the end when there's this really beautiful conversation between Shang-Chi and Katie, his best friend, where they're sitting by the lake and talking, and you actually hear this huge reveal that neither of us saw coming when they actually revealed it. And that's what I like about the movie is, like, it still left you all the backstory, but it wasn't your traditional origin story in the fact that it was structured differently, so it felt like a different approach to that, which I really like. So yeah, great casting, great action sequences, great visuals. We really have nothing but good things to say. I mean, the set pieces are great. We'll talk a little bit more about them in spoilers, but let's move on to maybe some of the things we didn't love about the movie, just because there are obviously going to be some things that nitpick us, unless it's a perfect film, which I don't think many Marvel films are perfect films.
Mhm.
A lot of them, the critique is that they don't fit into the universe, or that they are not separate and they fit into the universe. So you have to see all the other movies to understand it. That was a big
Mm.
thing with, I think, Black Widow at some points. It was trying to connect too much to other movies. But what did you think about some of the, maybe the, I don't want to even say bad, but like the less enjoyable stuff in the movie?
I mean, the only thing I can really think of was the last battle,
Okay.
which I don't necessarily like want to say because I feel like it's a spoiler.
Okay. Yeah, let's wait till the spoiler section to talk about that then, because I had some qualms with the last battle, but I don't think it was because it wasn't predictable, which I liked. Like,
Yeah.
it was something new. It wasn't your typical sky beam like a lot of these movies have ended with. But at the same time, the only thing is, like, that beautiful color. They decided to set the last battle in like this like dark and stormy
Mm.
weather, and it was like, I get it, like, you want to set the tone a little bit, but it was also
Mhm.
like, we've seen so much rich color, like greens and yellows and reds, and now just a lot of gray at the end, which is fine. I mean, I get, you want to set the tone, but again, like, I just would have liked, maybe, people can fight during the day. I mean, I think that's one of the greatest things about Infinity War is that big last battle is in Wakanda, and it is so bright and vibrant
Mhm.
still. And that was probably my only thing, was that at the end, it almost got to like the predictable third act of some of these MCU films. It wasn't because of what was going on in the battle, but I think the visual aesthetic, was kind of your traditional Marvel movie, kind of like, we're just gonna put this gray, all these clouds in there and gray. It's gonna be,
Right.
a lot of like CGI at the screen, which, I don't think this movie needed a ton of CGI, but I did like the CGI of the rings with the kung fu mix. But
Yeah.
I would have like a little bit more practical effects in some areas. But again, like it's very hard to nitpick some of the bad things in this movie because I think it does so much so well.
I think because, like, for the majority of the film, we see Shang-Chi, without the rings, that a
Hmm.
majority of his fight sequences are like, it's just all hand to hand combat, which is
Hmm.
great because it's just
I
like,
agree.
you're getting like real deal stuff here. Like,
Yeah.
it's all fight choreography. Like, there's no CGI about it. Where the CGI was included a lot that I liked were two moments in the film specifically was when the water kind of comes down and creates that map for
Hmm.
them. That was a very cool
Yeah.
part. Interesting. I've never seen something like that. I don't think in a movie where water like forms these like perfect like little crystals and like makes a
Yeah.
map. That was very very interesting. And then I also loved the shot of when then they're going through the forest that there's there's like a wide like an eagle eye shot of like all the
Yes.
trees moving and like creating the path for them, and I was like, this is
Hmm.
very cool.
Yeah,
So
and I know we're transitioning to some of the stuff we didn't like, but it reminds me of some of the stuff I did like just talking
yeah.
about it. But like I loved also the fantasy elements because at first I was like, oh, this is just another story about this guy living in this place. He's in San Francisco in this movie, and he has to like find his past, and he goes to this other like village. But I didn't realize how many fantasy elements they had. The
Mhm.
creatures in this, like it
Mhm.
felt like in almost like Star Wars, how you'll see like another creature and be like, oh, that's like such a cool creature. Or they're almost like Marvel's Pokemon, like these really interesting,
Yeah.
just hybrid animal type things. I mean, there's one really cute animal. This isn't really a spoiler, but it's like half chicken, half pig, and it's like, what is this? And it's cute, and they don't overindulge in it, but it's like this nice little, flavor to make it distinct and unique and stand
Yeah.
apart. Whereas Black Panther was just giant rhinos, and I'll be honest, the CGI for those giant rhinos kind of sucks. But like here, it's like the CGI was pretty good.
Sure.
Like these animals were great. I mean, obviously you have to also take in the culture of China, and there were a lot of lions and dragons as well. Like I love
Mhm.
the visuals of those creatures as well. I think this was more fantasy than I thought it would be, and I like that. I like when Marvel's like, yo. We are in the real world, but also this is still a comic book movie. We're still fantasy. We can still, give
Yeah.
you crazy creatures and stuff. And not everything has to be Captain America: The Winter Soldier, where it's just all hand to hand combat and guns and stuff. We know we can have live giant animals fighting alongside them and like actually make them look good. And yeah,
Yeah,
so.
for sure. That's what I was really saying with like the uniqueness and the unpredictability of this film Dill was because
Hmm.
I felt like the trailer like gave us enough to which we like understood like what this like protagonist was going through and why we would want to watch his story, but they didn't reveal everything.
Right.
And I mean Marvel just like does that. It always throws us a curveball like in every film, but like it was just even like little curveballs like this, like going to find like the hidden forest with the magical creatures. I was like, that is not a turn I thought this movie was going to
Yeah.
take at
Not at
all.
all. Yeah. And I did like it because of that. So before
For
we
sure.
transition into like spoiler talk, I do just want to say one last thing, and that is that a lot of the moments in this film are so deep and heavy that you really need to absorb it with all your attention.
Mm.
And our theater was the theater experience from hell. And I don't want to dwell on it too much, but Kels, it was quite because we saw it together, obviously.
Yeah.
And it was a rough theater experience. So I almost wish I could have gone into this with no distractions, and I think that kind of overall taints a little bit of the enjoyment of the film, not to a huge degree. I still really like this film, but there are
Mhm.
bits and pieces where I was like, wait, what? I missed that because I was paying attention to the man snoring behind me, or the woman shaking her cup of ice behind me, or the baby just screaming the whole movie, or the kid getting up and down maybe 6 times to run to the back of the theater in his flip flops that were so.
Yeah.
That took away a little bit, but I mean, Kelsey, if you want to speak on that, that was quite the experience.
I tried my best to tune everything out because I was like, I'm not gonna like, because like the more I like react to it, the more I'm taking myself out of the film.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I'm really just trying to tune everything out and like not react to what's going on. But like, there were definitely some things, and also because sometimes they, they don't always speak English throughout this film, so you have to be reading the subtitles. And also, just like a side note for me, I was like, I'm a short person. We
I
know
saw
this.
you were trying to see the
And
subtitles.
the subtitles are on the bottom of the screen, and they like the seats in front of me were blocking them. So like every time a subtitle came on, I needed a booster seat, honestly. We should have grabbed one for me before we went in.
Yeah, because the theater we went to, it's not the seats that recline, but they do kind of like lean back. So like if the chair in front of you leans back, it doesn't block a lot of the screen, but I get it. But anyway, it was not the best theater experience, so I think I do want to see it again with like a totally undistracted lens.
Yes,
But
for sure.
I still think I saw enough to enjoy it, and it's very clear by now that we both really really like this film. So if this is where you're ending your review with us, go see Shang-Chi. It's really really interesting. It just incorporates so many interesting genre elements that you're not used to seeing. And the cast is great. I think the cast works so well together. So go see it. It's unpredictable. It's fun. It dives in a lot of the fantasy, visually, aesthetically pleasing. Now let's get into, and I'm going to put the band on the bottom, spoilers, because if you're watching this, we're going to spoil the movie right now. So Kelsey, I know you said there were a few things in the past. Before we get to like the Marvel characters that we've seen in this also, like let's talk about some of the things you were saying. You said you had a little bit of an issue with like the end battle in terms of spoilers. And then we could also talk a little bit more about the villain and the different things that unfold. But go ahead.
Oh, also, one thing I forgot to mention with just like the things I liked, good soundtrack.
Yeah, great soundtrack. And Simu Liu is in the soundtrack. He has a song in the soundtrack, which I didn't realize. So when I see it again, I'll have to keep note of that. Yep. So I'll link that below.
Awesome. Just the thing with like the last fight, I didn't want to, ruin anyone's experience by saying this, but I wish, because we had gotten so much cool like hand-to-hand combat from him the whole movie, like I wish it was more of that and less about like two CGI dragons like fighting each other.
Okay. Yeah, you
that
wanted
was
more humans in the fight than
for sure, because I was like, he's not even doing anything. Like he's riding on the back of this dragon while the dragon does all like the heavy lifting. And I'm like, that's not why I like watch these movies. It's the epic battle is to finally, have the protagonist like get his like all his shit together to take on, the last thing. And I guess he does like eventually like put, he sends the rings into like the belly of the evil dragon and, explodes him. But that was just like that was like my only the one and only thing, because it was just because the fighting was just so cool that I could have watched it. I think they thought like maybe like, oh, they've been watching him fight all movie long, like we have to make him do something different. No, I could watch that style of combat like for 2 more hours. I could have, like, seriously, because it's just so cool.
Because also the normal average Marvel audience isn't really as exposed to like kung fu films and like Chinese films and films like that, where like it's a lot of hand-to-hand combat and that kind of style, like Jet Li and Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan movies. Like Western audiences aren't as exposed to that, so I like how they brought that style in. But I agree, like it became a dragon battle at the end. But at the same time, being a Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings fan and stuff like that, like seeing dragons just like emerge and start fighting, like I dug it a lot. And I know there are no huge dragons in the MCU yet, so I was enjoying it a lot.
Sure.
But again, I agree. Like I think also because it was so gray and cloudy, some of the dragon fighting, it got a little muddled. It almost looked like it was just a ton of CGI thrown at the screen, which I don't always love. That was one of the big things about the Black Widow third act, and I hate to compare them, but like that's the freshest movie in my mind. So I agree. The third act, love it or hate it, I mean, it's a big action sequence, and there were going to be stuff that didn't necessarily work all the time. But I do like how Awkwafina then did have that big moment with the arrow. Katie got to shoot the arrow, which was nice.
Katie's character was like the unsung hero in this film.
Yeah,
I was like so shocked.
And I think this will transition well to what we have to talk about next. But I think what I liked about this film is that she served the purpose as kind of the comedic relief in the first half. But then when they wanted to give her a richer story development, they were able to bring in another comedic relief so that she could now become more of a like hero and more of the protagonist alongside Shang-Chi,
Right.
or Sean. Now that we're in the spoiler section, we can spoil that his name that he's called in the movie is Sean. But yeah, so the comedic relief we teased is Trevor Slattery. And we have to talk about it because
Yeah.
before
Yeah,
we
we
went into
do.
it, All Hail the King was a short that they made a few years ago for the Iron Man 3 release. And it kind of teased the whole idea that there was other people left in this like Mandarin organization that were like keeping an eye on Trevor and kind of wanted Trevor dead because he was like kind of their puppet. And now we actually see that into fruition, that there is this huge like 10 Rings organization. It is the Mandarin. And he is essentially held prisoner by the real Mandarin in China, which I thought was very, very interesting. And to see Ben Kingsley come back to the role was just so
Mm-hmm.
exciting because he really is such a skilled actor, that and such a high prestige actor, that I was like, maybe he's just a one and done with Marvel because he's got a lot of other more prestige things to worry about. But
Right.
I'm happy he came back. And I'm happy he was in this because if you watch this podcast, Kelsey and I are huge fans of his.
Huge Trevor Slattery
Mhm.
fans,
Yeah.
stands for sure. Jill, I don't know if you like saw me freak out in the theater, but like during the whole like cave like dungeon sequence, as soon as I heard the noises like happening, I was literally like, "Oh my god, is it? Oh my god, is it? Could it be?" I was because obviously like you told me to watch the one shot, so like Trevor Slattery is fresh on the brain. Did I
Right.
think he was making? Did I go into Shang-Chi thinking he was going to be making an appearance? Absolutely not. I thought
Oh,
that,
really? Okay. Cool.
after that one shot, I was like, okay, so that now he's dead. They took him somewhere to be
Oh,
killed.
okay. Cool, cool,
So
cool.
no, no, he was taken prisoner because he's been like their jester basically for the
Mhm.
dad and like his whole like compound, like whatever that for the 10 rings. And I was just
Mhm.
like, wow, it was so great. It was such a sweet little like MCU nugget
Yeah.
to unwrap and
Yeah.
enjoy.
And then, and he did serve a really good purpose in the final battle, and they didn't overindulge in the comedy, which I liked.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the strengths of this. One of the strengths of Black Panther is the comedy does feel natural to the characters and the relationships. Like it's almost like funny banter between the two of them, but it's not jokes made for the audience all the time. It's
Mhm.
just friendly conversation between the both, and sometimes that's funny. And I think Trevor Slattery is great. Ben Kingsley's great, but other MCU people we saw, obviously the cage match between Abomination and Wong. We see that as well. We see Wong like kick the crap out of the Abomination, which is
Mhm.
awesome. Which is also kind of like an fu to the Incredible Hulk, which kind of makes me sad just because I'm like, no MCU film left behind. But if you have to leave one behind, it's the Incredible Hulk.
For sure.
And then we get a lot of Wong in the post credits, and at the very end of the movie itself, where he kind of like opens up this portal and says, "Hey, we need your help. Come with us." So let's talk about those post credit scenes because that's obviously spoilers. We didn't want to talk about it in our regular review. The
Yeah.
first post credit scene is Shang-Chi and Katie. Now they are both superheroes, I guess, that are part of, will probably be part of this initiative, part of the Avengers, or at least in cohorts with them,
Mhm.
which is great seeing both of them, not just Shang. But Sean and Katie, they go into this portal with Wong, and then Captain Marvel is there and Bruce Banner is there. And Kelsey, you did point out something interesting to me about Bruce Banner. What was that?
So Bruce Banner is not Professor Hulk. He is just
Mhm.
Bruce.
And
And
because he has
it's
his cast, we
yeah.
know his sling, we know it's after Endgame. So
So somehow I guess he's able to reverse the fact that he is Professor Hulk.
yeah, who knows?
But yeah, he was literally just Bruce. And what's happening in the end credit scene is that they're examining the rings, trying to figure out like where they are, where they came from, like what they're made out of, kind of things. And we learn that the rings are sending out a beacon and a message. And the big question is to who? And before we can answer it, Captain Marvel has to go, Bruce Banner has to go, and Wong is just kind of left with, you know what? You're on speed dial for us, basically. So
Yeah.
be ready to spring into action when we need you.
hmm Yeah, and that's the kind of stuff I liked. Is it waited till the post credit scene to really kind of like tie it into any future MCU stuff, which I liked.
Hmm.
I wish more movies were just kind of its own thing, and then later tied it in. Because even the stuff we get in the MCU, like Ben Kingsley as Trevor Slattery, you don't necessarily need to watch Iron Man 3 to like still enjoy that character, because he's just this guy who's been held prisoner who's now helping them and has this imaginary pig chicken that is really there. So I liked how this didn't rely on the other outside pre MCU knowledge. Even
Yeah.
Wong, you don't need to see Doctor Strange to watch this movie. You really don't.
Yeah.
All you need to watch is this movie, and I like that. And then the other post credit scene, we see Shay Ling, the daughter of the Mandarin, who is also Shang-Chi's sister, ends up kind of becoming the leader of the Ten Rings. Now, some people have interpreted this already, just looking online, as her now becoming like a villain and now in charge
Mm.
of this terrorist organization. But I do think, from my perspective, I was taking it more as this was a bad organization, and I'm going to now make it different and new and use it for good, because we saw this nice graffiti art, almost like she was kind of just revamping the whole place. We saw a bunch of like female warriors opposed to just all males. She was
Mhm.
almost kind of taking it into her own hands and making her own, um making beauty, almost like the phoenix rising from the ashes. Like she was making something
Yeah.
beautiful out of something that was so corrupt and so bad. Because the Ten Rings, it was a terrorist organization. So, what are your interpretations of the ending? Do you think she is now taking an evil turn, or do you think it's more of what I was saying, of her trying to like almost like plant a flower in the manure?
Right. I mean, I'd be lying if, the like villain origin story kind of didn't like cross my mind. Like, oh,
Okay.
is like she hasn't forgiven everything that happened to her in her childhood. So now she's good. This is kind of like payback for like everything that happened. But you know what? I think it'd be kind of a letdown to all of her character development and everything that she kind of went through, and her relationship that she kind of like rekindled with Shang-Chi, to like throw that all away to then
Right.
become like the next villain
Hmm.
for him. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Like I think
because we saw like these really impactful relationships with both him and his sister, and then him and his father. And the relationship with him and his father is that his father was just so selfish and was wanting his wife back so much that he
mhm.
let his whole life go, and he really realizes that. And I love that final moment where he does get taken by the dragon, because in that moment he realizes, I made a mistake, you were right, but there's really nothing I can do about it, and I'm going to pay the price for it.
Yeah.
And that was a beautiful ending there. But for now, another person to kind of turn and betray Shang-Chi, like, I don't see that as the natural progression of what the story was setting up. But if it
Mhm.
does set it up and it does justify it and make it an interesting, choice in a future installment, because I'm sure we'll get a sequel, especially if this is successful box office wise. I would like to see that explored, but again, like, I don't want to say yes or no if it's a good choice to make her evil until I see what they do with her again in the future.
Yeah. I think the villain is probably whoever is like receiving the message on the other
Mhm.
end of the 10 rings. I think like
Right.
that is teasing more of like a future villain rather than, the sister,
Yeah.
because especially because she starts that post credit scene which with looking at a photograph of her mother. And
Mhm.
I don't think like she's so embedded with like her mother's ideals and morals and all that, that she knows that like this is not what her mother would have wanted of
Yeah.
her, you
Yeah,
know?
and we've already seen, like I said, we've seen that with Tony Leung's character, like the father. Like, he's already gone through the idea of like being selfish because of thinking of the mother, and then realizing that that was never what the mother would have wanted. To
Mhm.
do the same thing with the daughter wouldn't make sense. But any last thoughts on like some of the spoilers? I mean, obviously we talked a little bit about the like set pieces themselves, but there were some that I really really love that I can go into depth more here. Like the bus sequence that we see in the trailer is so good. I mean, I love using that bus as like this kind of confined action space, and seeing all the different angles and places you can use this bus or cable car, I guess,
Mhm.
to your advantage, especially San Francisco, because we know San Francisco, the streets are so winding, and they really use that to their advantage. I mean, a lot
Yeah.
of great car chase movies in film come from San Francisco because the roads are so interesting and different that you can just play around with the different things. It makes me think of The Rock, the Nicolas Cage, Sean Connery film, where they're literally racing through San Francisco, and it's just a perfect roadmap, no pun intended, for a great action, because it's so
Yeah.
windy and twisty and turny, and there's so many
And
hills
there's
and
sales,
valleys and all
yeah.
that. Yeah, so I love that sequence. I love the side of the building. I mean, it was like the Mission Impossible film where they're trying to fight,
Yes.
but also not fall off the side of this building. And
Yep.
Katie's almost there. She has
Yep.
that piece of bamboo that she's literally hanging off of. Obviously, we talked about the great dragon fight, the car going through the maze-like forest. I mean, there were so many cool action sequences, and even the hand-to-hand combat was just beautiful, lyrical fighting choreography. It felt
Yep.
like a dance. So, any other things you want to bring up in the spoiler section, just pertaining to that or something else?
Well, I know this relationship seemed platonic for the
Mhm.
majority of the film, but there were a few moments at the end of the film, Jill, where I wasn't sure if maybe there's a little bit of a spark between Katie and Shang.
I don't know.
No, you didn't
I
see it? When they were resting their heads on each other, and then he kind of gives her this look like, huh, maybe.
See, I think that was more of like a like you've been through by my side through all this, like almost like a thank you to her. Like, and that's the thing with Marvel is I like how they're I would have I don't know what it is, but I like how it wasn't, they didn't kiss at the end and they didn't like have
Yeah.
this moment because to me it wasn't about that. It was more about
Yeah.
him and his family members, and she was just kind of along for the ride, but she did have her own arc, but it was never about the two of them because from the beginning the two of them were close. It's not like this movie made them closer. I mean, it
Mhm.
tuned her into what his life was, but this wasn't like, an odd couple scenario where like you meet and then like, it's not like Black Panther where it's him and his ex-girlfriend. So like there's this weird dynamic. Nick has like his ex. So there's that interesting dynamic there. It's like, no, this is just his best friend. And it's tough because maybe there's going to be something later on, but I like how they didn't make that choice because it proves that people can be friends in this universe. Not everyone has to be, you don't have to Drax and Mantis every single, or Gamora and Star-Lord every single couple in this, or Peggy
For
and
sure.
Steve, or Wanda and Vision. Like literally the list goes on and on. I mean, that's one of the reasons people don't love Avengers Age of Ultron, because they try to force something with Natasha and Bruce that just didn't feel realistic, didn't feel
Sure.
honest to the characters. So Clint and Black Widow is a good example of like a really good platonic friendship in the MCU. So I don't know. I mean, you were picking up more than I was, but maybe they were. Who knows?
Listen, I'm not saying I'm hoping for it. I'm not going to be disappointed either way if they do put them together in like future
Mhm.
films, or they're just friends and like that's all it is. That's fine. I just, I had a little bit of a thought, so I just wanted to know
Yeah,
what your
who knows?
thoughts
I
on it
mean,
were.
they're most likely going to make a sequel, so we'll see what happens there. And I hope they bring more back Trevor Slattery, because I think he works really well as this like catalyst, like this outsider in this universe. I mean,
Yeah.
especially now that Aquafina's more of now this warrior character. Like I keep saying Aquafina, I mean Katie, but she's now more of like an actual fighter that like now Ben Kingsley's kind of, or Trevor's now kind of the one who's just like, I'm just here as an observer, like almost like Martin Freeman's character in Black Panther, Ross. He's very much the outsider in this unit. But that's why they're bringing him back, and that's why they're hopefully bringing back Trevor Slattery. But any last thoughts on this film before we put it to bed, and then probably talk about it in a few weeks or months when we do like a Marvel ranking or some other shit?
No, I pretty much said everything I have to say about this one. It was very
Yeah,
good.
very good film. So I'm gonna take the
8 out
spoiler
of
ban
10.
away. 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I gave it. So good job, Kels. We're on the same page here.
Same
Yeah, I think
wavelength.
this is as much as I liked Black Widow. I think this is this is just a much more interesting movie to me. Between this, Black Widow, WandaVision, Loki, and then Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which I do think is the weakest of the five, but still pretty good. I think those five things like are really kicking off Phase 4 to a good start. And I
Yeah.
know Eternals is going to be at least interesting. I don't know if it's going to be good or great, but it's going to be interesting from what we've seen in the trailers. It's going to be
It will be
different.
a movie.
And then Spider-Man No Way Home, we'll see. Because there's also a
We'll
lot of
see.
expectation there. But I do think this year, really, Marvel's coming back full force. And What If, too. Speaking of that, we will be talking about What If episodes 4 and 5 next Monday. We wanted to take this Monday to devote solely and only to Shang-Chi, but we will be talking about the new Doctor Strange episode of What If, and then whatever we get next week with What If on the next podcast on Monday. Kelsey, where can they find you on the internet?
You could find me on Instagram at Kelsey A. Kilpatrick. You could find me on TikTok, Cause13. I'm much more active on TikTok than I am, I think, across all my social media.
I saw your crawfish video. That was
Oh,
quite interesting. Don't
thank
spoil it for the
you.
viewers. Let them experience it for themselves, because
Oh,
that is
yeah,
something.
you can go check that out for
That is
yourself,
something.
or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Cause Productions.
That's right. You can find me at Dylan_Randazzo at Twitter, at Dylan Randazzo417 on TikTok, and here at the Dill Pickle Movie Network. If you're listening on audio, thank you. Go check out the video. If you're checking this out on video, if you haven't seen our podcast before, check out all our past episodes. I'll link them up in the top right now. Our entire playlist of everything from WandaVision to Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki, all these movie clubs where we take an actor from the MCU and talk about some of their other works in the MCU. We also did deep dives on X-Men. We've been doing a lot of stuff in this podcast and the show. It's been really fun keeping it up week to week to week to week, and we will keep going till the end of the year. We might take a few weeks off at the end of the year, the Christmas, New Year's season, just to give ourselves a break, but it has been a lot of fun. So check us out, the rest of our podcast, if you are just joining us for the Shang-Chi review. If not, check out my other movie reviews on the channel. Enjoy it. I'm also doing Big Brother coverage as long as the season's still going. The season is ramping up, people. And then later today, that's right, you will get my ranking for the top 10 movies of summer 2021. There was a lot of great movies, and Shang-Chi will be on the list. So where will it come in? What place will I put it? You'll have to find out. That's coming later tonight on the channel, Monday night. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.